Hello and welcome back. Joining me today actually is Joe Fonseca, and we are going to answer some of your questions from the two Boxer Uprising videos that came out a few months back. So Joe kind of went through all the comments and pulled out a few interesting ones that he'd like to address in this video. So welcome back, Joe.
Thanks for having me again.
So this is kind of a set of questions, but really the central gist of them is: did the Taiping Rebellion indirectly lead to the rise of Boxers?
Again, really, really good question, and it happened a lot, right? So I think it's worth addressing. Uh, the Taiping Rebellion did a lot to China, more so than we can cover in this. And I mean, maybe in the future, if we want to sit down and do a whole episode or two about the Taiping Rebellion, that would be great. Taiping Civil War, if you want to get into naming things again. But yes, it influenced or indirectly led to the rise of the Boxers in as far as it led to the drastic changes to how the Qing state dealt with the military, how they dealt with centralization, and how they dealt with modernization. So I'll go into a little bit of that, but it's important right off the bat to know that the Taiping Rebellion, as a social political movement, religious movement, is very different from the Boxer Rebellion or the Boxer Uprisings, teachings, movement, politics, all that stuff. Uh, it's a very different set of people and dealing with very different issues. You do have the similarities in that they're both originally anti-Qing, but the Taiping, of course, took that to the extreme, and the Boxers didn't. But when the Taiping Uprising, Taiping Rebellion, Civil War, I'll settle on one of them, takes off, it's not the only thing happening in China, right? This takes about 10-ish, 15 years to really wrap up entirely. And while that's going on in the south, you have another half dozen rebellions going on all over China. And then halfway through that, you have the second Opium War, or the Arrow War, the burning of the Peking Summer Palace by the British and the French that happens in 1860. So there's a lot attacking Qing China at the time of the Taiping Rebellion. If you look north and look at the Neon Rebellion, you see a lot more similarities between them and the Boxers than the Taiping and the Boxers. Neon Rebellion is, we're not going to get super into it because, again, it's just probably worthy of its own talk, but it's another group of young, dissatisfied people who are dealing with a lack of proper response by the government to local concerns. Here it's not anti-Christian. Here it is repeated flooding and famine as a result of a lack of infrastructure and investment by the Qing. Now they're in the northwest of the country, and they're seeing hundreds or thousands die from these floods and then these famines, and they take up arms to try and topple the Qing government to assert some control. The similarity there is that they too, like the Boxers, are looking to the secret societies. They're looking to the traditions of the peasantry, the lower classes, to find the meaning of the rebellion, and they're doing a lot of the rituals that the different white lower society and the small sword society, all the big sword society, all these people are doing. They're participating in as well. So there's a lot more of a direct connection between them in how they organize and why they're fighting the rebellion, and the Boxers, who, again, this is happening 50 years later, right? Then the Taiping in the south, who are there's more of a ethnic issue in the Taiping Rebellion. There's the religious issue in the Taiping Rebellion, and there's the more aggressively anti-Qing racial issue, if you want to even call it that, between the minority group that was at the center of the Taiping Rebellion and the wider Han China, and then the Qing, who were, of course, ruling from the north. So there's a lot going on there. The important thing for the military is that in order to actually put down the Taiping Rebellion, the Qing government, because again it's fighting like 8 different wars at the same time, had to decentralize. It had to rely on landed aristocrats in the countryside to actually build up their own military forces who could then effectively challenge the Taiping. If we get more into it, there's a lot of talk about the ever victorious army, the Chinese Gordon, the little British thing. They didn't do much. They're a sideshow, but we focus on them because they're Western. The majority of the fighting was done by these reorganized local Chinese armies led by local Chinese aristocrats who could draw on a lot of the sentiment of protecting your home, protecting your family, to organize these armies, train these armies with their own money, and then use them to battle the Taiping. This stuck around after the rebellion was crushed. So you have this moving away from the traditional Qing Chinese army structures to forces that are structured around regional decentralization. You can see this in the 20s with the warlord era, and a lot of people made the connection that this is the groundwork for that, right? These regional armies, these regional structures.
Yeah, that's how I've always been taught to me, is that this is kind of the start of that, because the kind of warlordism that you see in, developing kind of through the 19-teens, but really hitting its stride in the 1920s. I mean, that doesn't materialize out of nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
They were kind of, because obviously when you have these individuals raising very local forces for generally local reasons, they're not necessarily going to be loyal to the state.
Mm-hmm. And that was one,
yeah,
you're 100% right. I think that was one of the issues, that when they did defeat the Taiping, when Zheng Guofang took Nanking back from the Taiping, he was urged by a lot of people to march on Beijing and take it for himself. And that was he was a Han Chinese, right? And that was the thing, like, oh, now you can do it. Now you can become emperor and you can overthrow these Qing. And he didn't, because he was very strict and loyal to his own code of ethics, and for that he will always be my favorite. But
yeah, I think he's a revered figure in China,
yeah,
as far as I know.
now he is. It goes back and forth. It's really fascinating. Because for a while he was a traitor, because there was that connection with the Taiping to communism, and that's a stretch we can talk about in detail later. Because what the Taiping were doing can look communist on the surface, but it's a very different overall structure. But because he was someone who put down the Taiping and protected the Qing, he was a traitor for a while, and then after that falls away, and we start trying to build up the Chinese history again. He's a hero because he was a strategic genius and a very personally correct kind of man.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, because he didn't overthrow the state when he could have. So yeah, I think those are the important influences that we need to talk about with the Taiping and the Boxers, is that this military restructuring begins during the Taiping. And of course, losing a war to the British and the French pushes them to continue modernizing the military. And the Neon Rebellion in the north is a closer actual predecessor. I mean, not a direct predecessor, but you see the similarities in the two rebellions.
Thank you very much, Joe. It's been great as always, and I hope everyone enjoyed it as much as I did, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, thanks again for having me. It's always fun.